Okay, great. So if we can start, if you could perhaps give us a little bit of insight and numbers. I know Cisco produce a lot of excellent sort of stats and reports on that. So in terms of data volume and these some of the infrastructure complexity challenges that businesses are facing at the current time.
Yeah, Phil, one of the things that I like to do is we gotta understand how we got here in the first place. Right. So if you kind of go pre-pandemic and even roll the clock back maybe 10 years, 15 years, and you look at how we operated as IT, you had a data center, right? You had a very single data center that ran your servers and your applications. And then we started to introduce cloud services. So while you had the data center sitting here, you're introducing cloud services that expanded out and started to offer you new capabilities. So while you're doing this, you're expanding out into the cloud, but yet you have to have this interdependency and interoperability with on-premise data set. So you're running in this hybrid model, or you're even breaking out to some third-party data sets that you need to pull in as you break into a microservice-based architecture for an app. So when you look at applications topology these days, it's not just a matter of a linear application, it's expanding out, running in different areas. And then you have dependencies. One particular microservice may have 15 or 20 or even 100 different applications that depend on that specific service. So the IT person is running into these challenges of how am I going to go out and support that? And then on the flip side, you have the person that's using the application, and applications are being designed in ways that are very elegant and very sleek, easy to use, high performing, and they become very dependent on these applications. So when you kind of think of that as somewhat of a meeting of the two areas, you have complexity on one side, you have simplicity of the user on the other side, and the person using the application, their tolerance level for poor performance is pretty much nothing. They have no tolerance for poor performing applications. As a matter of fact, we did a study called The Era of the Digital Reflex. And people have these applications that they depend on every day. You think about it from your own personal life. You check your bank account, the way you travel, the way you shop, all done through digital services. And if they start to break, we found that people are starting to get anxiety. They're starting to get very angry that the fact that the applications don't work. So now you have this conundrum going on where you have complexity on the back end, but you have a very sleek, elegant application running on the front end. And when you start looking at that survey that we put together, folks are asked how many applications are you running on your smartphone or that you depend on, and they think somewhere between 4 or 5 or 6 different applications. But in reality, what we found is it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 32, 33 different applications that they depend on a daily basis. So you see how there's this need of technology to start driving, user experience and user adoption and brand value and loyalty from your customers. And then you throw the pandemic into the mix, and the technology that we've been supporting is what's been making it possible for us to get through this pandemic, right? So it's become a very dependent piece of our culture and very dependent piece of our lives. So that's kind of where you see the overall problem and the challenge that's going on with technologists and the user wanting this very elegant, sleek experience.
Okay, and you mentioned the pandemic, and if I'm right, you recently produced a report that actually pointed out that organizations, in terms of their technology priorities, they've actually changed as a result of how they've had to adapt in the pandemic. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. So you think the pandemic basically turned our lives upside down overnight. People were forced to work remotely, rely heavily on technology, and what we found is 95% found that they changed their technology priorities or their digital transformation priorities due to the pandemic. And when you start peeling that back, right, you change your priorities. Folks are saying that this is now 82% of the respondents are saying that this is the biggest challenge that they've ever seen in their organization. And you bring that down to a personal level, the technologists that are responding are finding that 62% of them are saying this is more pressure than they ever had before. And roughly that same number, 68%, are saying that they've been asked to do things that they've never had to do before. Now, on the flip side, this is where the applications are driving the business, and this is where you're starting to see technologists shine as far as how they can impact business changes. One piece that I think is very interesting from an outcome is that projects are now being implemented in weeks versus years. So 71% of the respondents came back and said they were now elevating their digital transformation strategies, rolling them out in weeks versus years. Now, the part that I think is very important there is that the internal processes that were put in place for approvals have also shrunk. So now the business is seeing value by expediting some of these transformation strategies because they're now shortening that approval process. In some cases, that's well over a year as well. But they're kind of loosening up the reins so that technologists can start to advance things at a much faster pace because there's a big benefit to the overall business structure that you have.
Okay, and in terms of the perfect storm is perhaps an overused expression, but with all that you've outlined here, do you think that now is AIOps time? Clearly it's been around for 3 or 4 years, I think,
Right.
but is now the perfect moment for AIOps to sort of step up to the plate and say we can help people address this situation?
Yeah, so if you kind of look at it this way, AIOps is no longer a nice to have, it's become a necessity. If organizations don't have AIOps at some element in their roadmap or in their current implementation plan, that's where you start to sacrifice things like user experience, because you need to be able to take advantage of all the insights and the visibility that you have from an AIOps environment and be able to provide, how is the user performing before they actually call and complain. The other pieces around AIOps that help you drive things like your brand or your revenue is where AIOps comes into play. So at the end of the day, really AIOps is a necessity that almost all organizations have to be either in the process of implementing or moving very quickly to an AIOps vision or strategy that they've built together.
And in terms of maybe looking a bit more into the specifics, I know Cisco, there are clearly lots of challenges and opportunities, but in terms of ones you've identified, can you talk to us a little bit around the cloud migration piece, which is one of the sort of critical opportunities for AIOps?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you start thinking about what cloud migration means, some folks think it's just a matter of taking my data center and moving to the cloud. That's really, that's like one element, lift and shift, or refactoring applications, building them to understand, what's going to run better in the cloud, what microservices do I take advantage of. But where we come into play is by giving people full visibility of the hybrid environment. So you can see what's going on premise or in the cloud. Now, that does a couple things. One is helps you understand what are the dependencies those applications have internally so that you can correlate that to how it's going to run in the cloud. The other thing is when you start building a strategy or a migration, the folks that are investing in technology are the business leaders, and you need to have that validation pre and post migration of your cloud strategy to make sure that you're giving the biggest value to the business. So there you have an area where you're migrating to the cloud, but you got to see the end game, which is driving business outcomes as well as increasing that user experience. And then on the same token, once you get to a position where you've migrated to the cloud, you're getting into a position where now you can start to become more agile, the big benefits of the cloud are being able to roll out new features in a much more expedited manner. And the second piece is being able to scale with your user demand. So by having that in place, you're now able to then reduce that pressure you have on trying to become more agile and release new features, but it's all really tied to, how is the business performing? That's really the overarching piece here. What AIOps brings the value to is, driving that to a real business value of technology.
You mentioned the reducing pressure there. One of the other benefits, the potential benefits of AIOps is reducing pressure, increasing agility, and I guess not just for the IT infrastructure layer, but also the applications which sit on top of those, and ultimately the applications obviously help drive the business. So can you give us a little bit of insight as to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you start thinking about I talked about the complexity of the application. You need to be able to see what's going on. You got to have that full stack visibility that covers all aspects of the application, whether it's the network, whether it's the infrastructure it's running on, the application code, and most importantly, the user experience. So by having that clear view, you want to be in a position where you're now you're proactive. You're finding issues before your end user does. And that's something that is a new paradigm that we have in IT where, typically it would be you call the help desk or you fill out a ticket and you get your problem resolved. Now you can't be that way anymore. You have to be very proactive, be able to understand all the components of that application, quickly pinpoint where the problem's coming from, and then ensure that the end user doesn't have any negative experience on your application. Because like I said before, with the dependency on apps, if somebody no longer likes your application, they just simply stop using it and you start to damage your brand. So that's where you'll see a bridge coming together between how the application is performing and that end user or that end customer.
And that's an interesting point you mentioned about the application. You know, if it's not performing, customers, is AIOps able to give you that insight again as to how people are using the applications and maybe understanding, you know, whether something's wrong with how they're using it and whether that is a performance issue or they've just got fed up with it. I mean, you're able to analyze that application, I guess, the interface with customers. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you start thinking about what I talked about, going back to the complexity, and you start thinking about, I get visibility of that overall flow of the application, but it's a lot of data. You know, you're grabbing a lot of information. It's kind of beyond what we can handle from, just as a manual perspective. So you got to have something that can process that data and give you those valuable insights that allow you to make those prioritized decisions. So if you have 30 issues that crop up, you want to understand what are the top 5 or top 2 issues that I want to target first, because there's a downturn in revenue if those applications are not back up and running the way they should be running. So you kind of see that. I guess I'm emphasizing this a lot, but the bridge between IT and the business, and during this period of time, before pandemic and especially during the pandemic, the tie between technology and the business has never been more dependent on each other than I've seen in my personal 25-year career.
And in terms of, I mean, we've alluded to the fact that the pandemic's created this situation where you've got all these IT issues going on to manage, and AIOps is sort of come into focus as helping with that. Beyond the pandemic, I'm guessing that hopefully what people have learned and started doing with AIOps, there's much more they can be doing with it in the long, when like new normal, next normal, whenever that happens to be.
Oh yeah.
AIOps is just not for today. It's clearly got a role to play in that new environment. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. The pandemic definitely paved the way for technologists to start to change the way that they've been operating. Post-pandemic, if you look at the benefits that AIOps drives for a business, like I talked before, reducing that elements of complexity of how the application works, getting those AI insights from all the data that you're starting to collect, but then also starting to build into automation. So your view or your roadmap of building an AIOps platform is not just around monitoring and supporting your customers, but it's also about building in some automation so that you can do things around, if something starts to drop from a workload that you're running in a cloud, rerouting that workload so that you can ensure that customer experience is there. So I think what you're seeing now during the overall pandemic and the rise of AIOps within many companies' plans and strategies is the fact that IT needs to be able to do a couple things. One is they need to be able to support the end user the best way possible, ensuring that user experience is there. But they also have to innovate. Now, if you're talking about way too much complexity and people are spending 50, 60, 75% of their time trying to resolve issues, then you're not going to be able to innovate. So by enabling your AIOps platform to be that full stack visibility, provide you those AI insights, but then also build automation into that so that you can have somewhat of an environment that self-corrects itself and ensures the top-notch experience.
And in terms of Cisco's sort of place in the market, if I'm right, the AppDynamics is the background is application performance monitoring, but obviously AIOps has other sort of angles to it. So can you just give me some idea of what, where Cisco sits within the AIOps market, and maybe if you're able to share any plans sort of moving forwards as well?
Yeah, sure. So when you look at Cisco as a whole in AppDynamics, so Cisco and AppDynamics, we kind of view that the overall application space there's bigger problems to solve than just a single product, right? One single product can't solve everything for a customer. That's why you saw us go and acquire a company called ThousandEyes. So ThousandEyes gives you that visibility down to the network layer from both the enterprise as well as the public internet. And when you think about people using your applications, it's no longer just restricted to a data center. They're heavily reliant on their local service providers or different areas of running in cloud environments. So you think about from Cisco and AppD together, we launched the central nervous system vision a couple of years ago that allows us to build upon our abilities of providing application performance, user experience performance correlated to the business, but adding in those components of the network and adding in the components of the infrastructure so that we can bring them all together and then build you that actioning component. So what we've also done is we've done a couple things recently. We also integrated with a product called Inner-Site Workload Optimizer, which is a Cisco product with AppD. So AppD gathers you those insights. If you're starting to see a slowdown or a degradation in performance on the application based on underutilized or over-provisioned infrastructure, we can reroute that infrastructure to ensure that the user experience is top-notch. We've also launched a new portfolio of cloud visibility capabilities that showcase how an application looks and has its dependencies in that multi-cloud or hybrid type environment. Because when I talked earlier, you talk about breaking an app up into microservices and what have you. One microservice may have multiple dependencies that are either upstream or downstream. Being able to visualize that and understand how that new modernized application should look and perform is critical. The other component is we launched the cognition engine, which is that AI component that allows us to correlate metrics together from the app performance to how the business is performing and giving you those real-time insights. And one other very exciting feature that we launched, and this is, all these pieces I'm talking about are right out of the box. The other component is the experience journey map. So when you start thinking about, I built an application or I rolled out an application to my business, what does the user behavior look like? What are the most commonly used paths? Where's the areas that I'm starting to see some level of reduction of response or drop off? You want to be able to see at a very clear level, what does that experience look like? And we've done this where you just literally install AppDynamics with the end user monitoring capabilities, and you'll get this experience journey map that pops up that shows you what the behavior looks like. And the cool part is when you think about, the pandemic happened overnight. That's a great use case because behaviors changed literally overnight. And you can never predict that with, siloed based tools that don't give you the clear picture. So you kind of see how, our view is there's a bigger problem out there that includes infrastructure, network, application performance, user experience, all running on the premises of what's my business outcome. And that's really what it kind of ties down to.
Okay, so holistic, I guess, is because I know there are some sort of fairly point specific AIOPs, but I think you're suggesting that a holistic approach to AIOPs is going to give you the best return on the investment. Is that right?
That's right. Well, think of it this way. If you have an application and you have, different components of it, and you only take a sliver of that, and I just want to look at that sliver, it's never going to tell you the end game. The end game is, how is that user performance for my application? What's the revenue coming through? You got to have that full picture. So that's really what the crux of the challenge is that, we've exploded in complexity, and that's something that's known. Every time I speak about that with folks, everybody's all nodding their heads at, yeah, things have gotten definitely much more complex. But it's a bigger challenge out there than just saying I only need network monitoring, or I only need infrastructure monitoring, I only need APM. You got to have a view of bridging things together, and that's really where our approach is, opening our platform. We launched our cloud native capabilities to be able to ingest data from the cloud providers, so that we can correlate that together, so you understand a better view and vision. We've integrated with Cisco Inner-Site Workload Optimizer. And then we have also had a partner program of partners that we also integrate with too, like a ServiceNow or some others to route incidents and provide contextual data in those incidents.
Okay, and before we wrap up, have you got any final thoughts, particularly I guess for end users? I think we're still relatively early days, maybe for the AIOPs. So if people are looking at it, trying to understand, think any one or two pieces of advice for folks, and maybe even those who've started with it and are maybe getting frustrated because for whatever reason it's maybe not doing what they thought it would. Just sort of one or two words of wisdom, if that's possible.
Well, it's definitely a shift. So you have a couple things. One is AIOps you have to shift the mindset as well. So you'll have companies that I've spoken to that will say, this is the way we do things. That's not the right approach. You got to come in with an approach that I need to build an AIOps vision. I need to build an AIOps roadmap. I need to get everybody on board, whether you're in any domain of the specific app, and bring those groups together, because the end game is about driving business. So when you start your project and you start your efforts to go down the path of AIOps, the overarching piece is, what are my business outcomes that I'm looking for, right? Is that user experience? Is that driving revenue? Is that driving brand? Is that driving loyalty in my customer base? You have to understand what your end game is. And then all the pieces can fall into place so that you can start to build out that strategy, build out that vision. And then those folks who are already in that process, you're ahead of the game. You're moving in the right direction. But if you haven't put that business outcome in your vision, go back and ensure that you can drive to an impact to the business. Like I said before, applications and software are the business today. And that's really what the mindset has to be.
That's brilliant. I've really enjoyed chatting to you today. So, Greg, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Phil, and good luck with the event you have.